All right, my template. So I was like this the other day, and I was like, okay, so to compose, you have to do like first the horns and unload the horns. And the guy is like, dude, it sounds glorious. Like mine sound like shit. And he was showing me the stages the sound goes through. And so I figured I'll do a video. So that's what we are doing now. Now, I've got a little bit of an outline here. So first thing, this is my unfinished template, all right? I'm working on it. You're always working on it. I just changed my template, right? I have a goal, which is I want a faster template, lighter template, no more than 32 gigs of RAM in 0 milliseconds of added latency. Added latency means the latency for like the buffer size latency. No added latency. I had plugins, I'll explain this later, but I had plugins in my stems like these two, right? That added a ton of latency. As you can see down here, 47 milliseconds of latency. What? Yes, I dealt with that with constraint delay compensation. I have a key command for this. It's a sign here. This guy here, see? Click. Boom. Now let's go. So the transformation, I wanted to go from 2 computers to 1 computer, from BE Pro to no BE Pro, everything hosted here. Let me just expand it a little bit. This is that's a complete template, and you are seeing the trick now, which is disable tracks. But I wanted to go from like rack tracks to instrument tracks, no more 16 multi-timbral contact, and then from like using expensive plugins to try and use stock Cubase plugins, right? Trying to use the Cubase built-in EQs and things. Right? So 1, I stopped spending money on expensive plugins, and 2, the updates and keeping up and installing a third party. All right, why all this? Well, because it's more efficient, less updating stuff. Also, you have to understand, I'm a composer, I do movies, I'm working on a movie at the moment. I'm gonna blur this out because it's still not released, and I've been doing this for 12 years. So as you can imagine, I started with a simple system, a simple template. It's been growing over the years. It got very complex at some point. I'd simplified, and very complex at some point, and I'd simplified, complex, simplified.
Enough.
And what I found is like the most complex your system is, the more problems generally. And also when you are composing the day-to-day, sometimes if the system is too complex, sometimes it kills creativity because it's harder to drive, right? And so if it's simple, it's easier and you feel at home. It's like now it's so easy, right? You don't have to think about so many things. So that's the first thing. The simpler, the easier. But also, when I'm teaching, I also teach. I've got cinematic composing. There's a school with more than 9,000 students. And what I found is that over and over again, I'll teach, okay, so here's how you compose, right? And they'll tell me, mother, you've got quite a big template, I don't have that. Easy for you, I can compose. What about me, right? And so I figured if I would make something that's kind of like a little bit more attainable, right? Something that you can build in a week or something like this. I rebuild this in 20 hours. Then people is like, okay, yeah, this is doable. They see it tangible. It's like, hey, yeah, I can do it. I can compose like this guy. So that's why. Let's talk about my template. Unfinished template. So your sounds sound glorious. When I'm composing, mine sounds like shit. Show me the stages. This is your okay, this. All right, so instruments, the distribution, EQs, let's talk about this. So these are the way I've got my template distributed. So I've got my sketching patches up here, just basically stuff that I need for sketching or stuff that I need for like fast action patches. If I need something like enabling track, waiting, still waiting. That is something that bothers very much of the new setup, just so you know. That's the thing that I was worried about. It makes sense that this one takes a little bit longer to load because it's a massive track, but still. Also, the computer's been running for 3 days. 5 days? Let me see. 3 days. It's long enough. Needs a reboot. By the way, my goal, keeping the template under 32 gigs, quite there. We're good. Still waiting. This usually goes faster. It's just today because I'm recording the video. It's making me wait. Oh, this took forever. Okay, so choir. So stuff like this, right? So stuff that's pre-orchestrated. So the same thing with long notes, then kind of like ensemble, epic, and orchestral percussion, choir, pianos, you know, some big epic horns, trumpets, you know, woodwind short, long, brass, the whole thing, right? So this is the first one. Then we've got the strings. This is a series of like basic strings, stuff that you're gonna use all the time. If I just had these tracks, you know, I can get it started, sort of thing, right? Then I've got my CSS. So I've got violins 1, 2, viola, cellos, and double basses. I've got the split of long, short, long, short. It's basically just... Es que iba a pasar. ¡Iba a pasar! Estaba claro. Estaba la cosa muy rara. Esto no lo pongamos en el vídeo. Vamos a mantenerlo en secreto. No lo pongáis, hijos de p***, que os lo veo que lo ponéis. Alright, loading template. Let's see how long it takes. Start. Come on, Cubase, do your thing. In 30 minutes, I'm going to Disney with the kids.
Yes, 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 and yes!
I'm not always here. I'm a dad. I spend quality time with my kids. Seriously. 1 minute, loading template, come on. Usually it'll take shorter. So 2 minutes. A little bit too long. Alright, we are back. So sketching patches, then strings basic, then my CSS. My recommendation here is I separate the longs and the shorts and make sure to deactivate, right, this. It's option click, the ones that you are not using. Then I've got a few more strings here, and then we go to what I call orchestral enhancers. A little bit of kind of like orchestral percussion, celesta, arp, a few things, right? Then we've got the horns. Then we've got trumpets and trombones. Then I've got tuba. So basically I've got it divided, just me. Horns, to me, is its own unique section. Then to me, brass is trumpets and trombones. And then I've got the low brass. So horns, brass, low brass. Don't destroy me in the comments, please. And then I've got woods, Cinematic Studio woods. Got them here. And then I've got the woodwinds ensembles, right? So the runs and reaps and things like this. Then I've got a few zebras. Omnisphere's not here anymore. Will come back for sure. But again, it's my unfinished template. And I've got a little bit of epic percussion, right? The big stuff, right? And these guys as well. And a little bit of hybrid trailer stuff. And then the pulses. All right. And the stems. So that's it. Distribution, done. Then the EQ. Each track has EQ. See, up here, each track has at least a little bit of a cut at around 25 or something like this, and then finding like the MIDI frequency and cut it a little bit. I'm not going to show every single track what I've done, but it's basically it. It's more like chirurgical EQ. It's more about getting rid of rather than adding. Not adding most of the times. It's more like I'm talking about frequency stacking. Like if you've got a real orchestra performing at the same time, generally no problem, right? But when we are composing with samples, what are we doing here really? Well, what we are doing is stacking one kind of like, let's think about this for a second. We are stacking an orchestral recording over and over and over and over and over and over. You're using the same room, the same mics array, right? And if there's a little bit of a frequency build up and we're stacking it, then we've got frequency stacking problems. So that's why we are cutting, you know, around the MIDI area. Sometimes also here, depends on the instrument. I'm not gonna show everything because I don't want you to, oh, this is how he EQs violins. There's no such thing like this, right? This is how I EQ'd these violins for me based on my taste, and it's this specific library, this specific patch, right? So it's gonna be different. But anyway, every track just got a layer of EQ, all right? Just a little bit. Then tape saturation. Here, let's zoom in. Zoom in, zoom in, zoom in. All right, cool. This guy here, Magneto 2. It's basically just emulates a little bit of tape saturation. I like that. Tape saturation is gonna add a little bit of warmth and character to the sound. Basically, you have to listen to it to see the difference. Very subtle. But when you put it all together, it's meaningful. Violins, harmonics, with, without. You hear the difference? Yeah, me too. No, yeah, it's sounds a little bit wider, right? Adds a little bit of character and warmth to the sound. It just makes it sound a little bit more pleasant to me personally, right? So EQ, done. Tape saturation, done. Cool, let's continue. Now, stems. All right, this is important. Let's talk about this. The stems. So basically, all these tracks that you see here will be routed to each one of the stems here. All these tracks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, lots of tracks, right, are routed to a smaller group of stems. Let's say I've got 30 stems, right? So big group of tracks, small group of stems. Let's say that these are like these strings, high, short notes, all right? And here's these strings, high, long notes, low, short notes, strings, low, low notes, etc., right? Here's the brass and woods, same thing, right? So this group of tracks, so this one, and this one go here, right? So I'll route them here, and then these ones go here, and then these ones go here. You get the point. So basically is distributing and organizing the template. Now I'm getting ahead of myself, I'll explain this later, but this group of tracks then gets routed to us even a smaller group of stems. You know, a group of these tracks will be the orchestral stuff, then another group of these stems will be the synths, then I'll have percussion and bass, for example, right? And this is what I deliver to the dub stage for mixing with dialogue and sound effects. Why do we deliver stems instead of sending the surround or the stereo master track? Because it allows them to better mix our music with dialogue and sound effects, right? If something of our music conflicts with the dialogue, maybe they can bring down the percussion while keeping the orchestral melodic instruments, for example. But let's go back to where we were. So we've got the stems, this thing in the mixer. It's after all these tracks, boom, the stems here. All right, let's talk about it. Reverbs. I've got the reverbs inserted in the stems. Why? Well, one, because I want to be able to print the stems if I need to. Second, more control, you know, separating reverbs if I need to. 3, because I can. LOL. Things that you should know. Let's talk for a second. Mixing orchestral music. Should you mix your music? Yes, if you've got time. If there's budget to hire a mixing engineer. If you can do it yourself, you've got the time, you can mix your music. Do I mix my music always? Not always. Do I mix my music? Yes, sometimes. How do I mix my own music? Generally, I'll export the stems and I'll mix my music using the stems. Why? Because it's a smaller amount of tracks. If I have to mix my music and I exported every single track that I've got here, it's a lot of work, right? Stems, smaller group of tracks, still gives me enough flexibility to mix my music, right? Because I've got enough separation. So things to consider. If I'm mixing my music using stems, I'll bypass the reverbs. When I export the stems, I'll export them dry. So basically, I'll go here, I'll select my stems, and I will either bypass all the plugins or I'll bypass the reverbs one by one. There are not that many. All right, important to understand. When I'm working on a project like this, at the moment, this is a movie, it's a TV movie, it's 57 minutes of music. It's less than 30 days. We're starting on the 16th, ending on the 9th next month. So there's no time to mix. Really. So what you'll do is, make sure that the music sounds great from here, right? So you are composing and you're making sure that it sounds. So my stems, I use the stems to do kind of like a quick mix, like a pre-mix that's good enough for, for it's done, right? That the sound that I get from here when I'm done composing, I'm not going to actually export the tracks audio, importing a new blank template and do the mix there. I do that sometimes. Not in this case, not in this project, because there's no time. Imagine with the rewrites, we're also recording with an orchestra. There's no time. There's no time to do all that. And aren't you mixing the orchestra with the samples? I literally import the recordings from the orchestra here and I do the mix here. That's it. I replace some of the samples here. And so the stems is where I do the mix. By the way, if a mixing engineer is mixing the music for me, generally I won't send them the dry stems. I will send them each individual track. But are you losing the processing that you are doing in the templates? Yes, but they will do a much better job. All right, let's continue. Reverbs, check. EQ, same thing. Another layer of EQ, very simple, very basic, because we've done the EQ earlier on, track by track, but again, just a little bit of cutting the low end for those stems that don't need any low end, and cutting a little bit of the kind of like the MIDI frequency when it needs to be cutted. That's it. See, it's different for each one, but it's very, very subtle because I've already done that on a track by track basis. EQ, check. Analog tape saturation, Magneto 2, the same thing again, right here. This Magneto 2, was not here earlier. This is replacing what I had. All right. Do you see all these plugins that are not active? This is what it is. I'm gonna activate them. We're talking about these two plugins. These sound beautiful. I love them and I love what they do to this horns sound. But take a look at what happens when I activate them, right? I'm gonna activate the first one and take a look at this. First one, boom, 23 milliseconds added of latency, of delay. Second one, boom, an extra 23 milliseconds, 47 total milliseconds of delay added. Now, when you hit the keyboard, you're gonna have 47 milliseconds added. Now, how do these change the sound? Without? With? So it does change the sound in a beautiful way. Oh man. But it also adds 23 milliseconds of delay. No me gusta. Again, I had this, right? I've got this button here. Boom. Constraint delay compensation. See? Active, not active. Just click of a button. So that's how I had it in the past. By the way, all the changes that I'm doing in my unfinished template are not definitive. Sort of like I'm keeping the old template in case that I still want to preserve something. So what I've got at the moment, what I'm running at the moment is actually two templates in one. So that's how I did it in the past. I use these plugins and I use this guy. But anyway, so without plugin, and on top of that, this culture bolter. So it adds aggression and brightness, and I like it very much. Now, what I'm trying to do at the moment is I'm trying to replicate this kind of color without these plugins. That's basically what I'm doing. I'm still not there, but I am close. All right, let's continue. Analog tape saturation, done. Parallel compression. Oh, there are some composers that will have like a layer of parallel compression, and usually at the stems level. And generally, there are two ways of doing this. In Logic, generally what you will do is you'll have your track. This is your track. So let's say it's piano or horns, right? And then you can actually assign two outputs of the track. So you'll assign it to two stems, right? Let's say this is the piano track. And this is the piano stems, right? And you'll assign the output of this track to this one as well as this one, right? You're gonna compress this one very much. And you're gonna have the fader of the non-compressed one at 0 and the fader of the compressed one at, I don't know, something like -8, -6, something like this, right? And so basically, because this one is very compressed, it's going to add thickness. It's gonna fatten the sound, right? And then the output of these two tracks are going to go to like a summing stem, let's say the piano again. Piano summing stem, they're gonna go here. Both of them are gonna go here. Both of them. That's the process. With Cubase is a little bit different. You're gonna have the piano track here, and then you're gonna have one stem because you just can have one output here. You can have a send, but the output is gonna go from the piano track to the piano stem, and then you're gonna have a send here. You're gonna create a second group track, and this is gonna go here as well, right? And so this is gonna be compressed. And again, this is gonna be like at 0, this is gonna be like -8, -6, something like this. These two are gonna output to this other stem. Hopefully it makes sense that Sam's, this is the piano stem, it's the piano I don't do any of that. What I do instead is I'll have my piano track, just this guy here, my piano, right? So my piano goes to my piano stem, all right, here. Now my piano stem has a compression plugin. So this is the piano stem and this is the compression plugin. And the compression plugin is set in kind of like parallel compression mode. Very heavy compression, as you can see, very harsh knee, the ratio is 10:1, the typical parallel compression, right? But then here's a dry signal at 0, and this is the wet signal, the compressed signal. So basically I'm bringing it in. So this, even if it's compressing, it's actually not compressing because it's just the dry signal, and then I'll bring it in till I like it, right? And it's at -6.8, and so that's it. Without, with, It's not in every stem, just in those stems that I feel that it would benefit from, fattening the sound a little bit. Now the parallel compression is great and things that you have to keep an eye, because depending on the loudness coming from your tracks, maybe you're gonna be compressing too much that, so you gotta keep an eye. You don't have the freedom of running your template a little bit louder or softer, and doesn't matter. It does matter because you've got dynamic plugins later on the line. So they have to be the whole template, and each one of the sections, they always have to be at kind of like the same loudness, right? So what I recommend for that is having one track that you can like use always when you are composing. That's, it's like your reference track, and everything should sound balanced with that track, right? Or even if you are not using it for the type of music that you're gonna compose now, still use it as reference, right? That's anyway. Hopefully it makes sense. So parallel compression done, and then stems Y. I explained this earlier, the pre-mix for the things like TV movies and things like that. If I need to mix myself, usually I mix with the stems. If a mixing engineer mixes for me, then I'll send the dry tracks, not the stems, the actual tracks. Finally, we've got this smaller group of stems here. See? Orchestra, percussion, synths, lead, bass, other. And that is what I explained earlier. This guy here, we've got all the tracks here, right? All these guys here. Then they go to the stems, all these guys here, the stems, these guys here. And finally, all these guys will go to a smaller group of stems right here to the left, these guys, or these guys here. And these guys, this is what I deliver to the dub stage for like the dub mix, when they mix your music with the sound effects and dialogue. I think we're done. The last thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna pick one track or a couple or three of them, and we're gonna follow the path. You know, it's a track, it has this EQ, it has this analog saturation, then it goes to this stem. That we're gonna do that with a 1, 2, or 3 tracks, we'll see. So the piano, this piano is emotional piano, sound iron. It has a little bit of EQ. Maybe I could cut a little bit more, because truly I don't need the low frequencies of the piano, and got rid a little bit of the muddy area. Cool. All right, so that's the first thing that we've got. Now here in the channel strip, I'll have a little bit of tape saturation. This guy here. So, and this goes to the piano stem, and this has a little bit more EQ, has a little bit of parallel compression, then has a little bit of reverb. If I need more, I'll just increase the mix, right? Or the length. In this case, I don't need that much. In this case, for this particular stem, I'm adding a little bit of very subtle final compression to control some of these louder transients. And that's it. From here, this will go to the other stem. So these stems here, they've got orchestra, percussion, synths, lead, bass, and other. The piano is going to go here. In the past, and this is something that I'm replacing, I had a little bit of tape saturation, and I had this stressor without again, with. Alright, now these guys are not active anymore because at 48.5 milliseconds of latency that I don't want. And so I'm getting rid of these guys. Let's do another one, staccato or short violins. So we're gonna go here. All right, cool. So first thing, we've got a little bit of EQ, cutting a little bit of the low frequency that we don't need for the violins. They don't need, by the way, all these that I'm cutting, the low frequencies, the high pass filter, we won't even hear any difference here. Just cutting like the low rumble that we don't even hear. But you know, when you put all these tracks together, it tends to stack. So then, you know, cutting a little bit of that muddy area here. In this area, there's a little bit more piercing, and then adding a little bit of brightness. That's it. So without, with. Alright, after this, as you can see, my unfinished template doesn't have the layer of tape saturation that it should have. I'm gonna go here, magneto 2, boom, magneto 2 to all of them. And I have to fine tune this, but I'm gonna bring up all of them to at around 30. That's what I do. And then I'll bring up the high frequencies a little bit more. And that's pretty much it. I have to work on this. I like to bring up this Up a little bit. Anyway, without, with. See, adds a little bit of character, presence, and brightness to the sound. Now from here, this goes to a string short high-pitched stem, which is here. It has several things. Another cut here, and a little bit, just like 0.8 dBs in this case, for kind of like the muddy area. Then I'll open the strings a little bit, without. This is basically what it does. This is at 1.5. I'm gonna bring it up so you see the difference. It opens the strings, right? It makes them sound a little bit wider in a very subtle way. I tend to open the strings I'll explain this in other videos, but for the strings it's nice to open them a little bit, and especially the staccatos, right? Then a little bit more of tape saturation. Same thing. Add it stacked to the other, and that's it. Like, this one is like, why are you adding tape saturation? And well, I'm adding tape saturation to the CSS Violins 1 staccato, and that's the processing that it does there. And then there's a bunch of tracks that are routed to this stem, and there's another tape saturation that processes it in a different way. All right. Now, if I need some reverb here, in the past I had this guy. It's a very short 1.4 seconds reverb, but again, this adds 24 milliseconds, so I'm not using this guy anymore. And so if I need a reverb, I insert something like this. I'm using FabFilter Pro R lately. Just I like it. It's very easy to use, very light, good sounding, and it doesn't add any latency. But there are many others. Bahala's great. There are many options. All right, so that's it. This is my template. It's work in progress, especially now that I'm literally changing the entire infrastructure. Just a week ago was Be Pro to computers, rack tracks, multi-timbral, and now it's everything in here. You know, single contact instances and the disable enable track system. So far, so good. Pros and cons. I'm happier with what I've got now than what I had in the past, but every composer will have a different template. It is the one that works for me. Hopefully you found something useful here. Because I'm scoring a movie at the moment, I figured that I would also explain this part up here, where I've got this video, temp, time signature, then I've got the markers, and then I've got music, my music, temp track, dialogue, sound effects. So when I receive the movie, generally they will send me the video, and then I'll have temp track, dialogue, sound effects separated in 3 separate tracks. And what I'll do is I'll have here some like this, and I'll have music, temp, dialogue, sound effects, and I can mute them quickly or solo them quickly, so I can compare or listen, or just listen to my music, or listen to music, make dialogue, or just listen to them, things like this. All right, I hope you like this video, got some value. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.